I woke up to a DJ testing a mic full, garish, unignorable, and someone shouting about floral arrangements as if this were Times Square, not my front field, and for a second I thought I was still dreaming. Then I rolled over, looked out the window, and there it was, string lights draped across my barn like bunting on parade day, rows of white chairs planted in my pasture, and a buffet table set up 2 feet from my chicken coop. That's when I stopped wondering and started stomping flannel boots. The whole farmer looked straight into the middle of a wedding that somebody had decided to hold on my property without so much as a buy your leave. They were bustling around like they owned it. Caterers with clipboards, a teen hauling plates, a DJ fiddling with a mixer, guests sipping champagne and pretending the pasture was a boutique venue. And right in the center of the chaos, barking orders like she'd invented community itself, was Karen Montgomery Platinum Bob, perfectly obnoxious pastel power suit, bright as a warning sign. If you live in a place with an HOA, you know the species righteous loud, thoroughly convinced the rules bend to her will. "Oh, Jake, there you are," she said, smile so practiced it might have had a warranty. And for a split second, I almost laughed. "Don't you just love how everything's coming together?" I folded my arms and tried not to let my voice sound like it was about to break. "Karen, what the hell is going on?" She waved a manicured hand like I was being dramatic. "We're just using your barn for a few hours. It's my daughter Ashley's wedding day," she said, all sweetness and entitlement. "You wouldn't want to ruin that, would you?" She said it like guilt was a favor she was doing me. The chairs, the lights, the cake, all on my dirt, all set up by people who'd paid for the illusion of country charm. She even had the nerve to add, "I may have told a few people this was a reserved venue and collected a small fee, but imagine the exposure for your barn." As if her theft were PR. You can imagine the part of me that wanted to call the cops right then and there. Instead, I did something more fun. I turned and walked back to the porch like I was going inside for a nap, and I let the grin slip across my face, that grin that says trouble's coming and trouble's wearing my colors. The dogs knew something was up before I did. Bear, Moose, Tank, Daisy, 4 combinations of bark and enthusiasm and bad decisions. They were already pacing tails like flags. I knelt, clipped open the gate, and said 3 words they understood perfectly: "Go get 'em." And then just like that, the pasture turned into a disaster movie shot in slow motion. Moose made a beeline for the buffet and snagged an entire roast chicken like a thief in a rom-com tank, plowed through the rows of white chairs with all the grace of an elephant at a tea party. Daisy leapt onto the cake table and detonated a frosting crater, and Bear marched straight for Karen because apparently pastel suits are Bear's favorite thing to hug. Chaos is a funny thing, it strips the polite mask right off. The DJ abandoned his board, champagne flew. The bride clutched her dress and started crying, and Karen screeched like someone had set off a foghorn inside a glass factory. I stood on the porch with a glass of lemonade and watched the jewel of the HOA fall apart. People screamed, chairs toppled like dominoes. And for the first time that day, the pasture stopped being a boutique backdrop and started being exactly what it always was, my land. The dogs did what dogs do. They made a mess, they made a scene, and they made sure no one forgot whose dirt this was. Karen, mid-tantrum, found a new kind of fury when her usual power, the one that makes neighbors do what she wants because they're afraid of small-town discomfort, didn't work. She accused me of ruining her daughter's day, threatened me with lawsuits, vows of social exile, the works. Obviously, she didn't calculate for the bride and groom, noticing things that didn't add up. That's when the first twist cut through the chaos, sharp and unexpected. Ashley, the bride, looked at her mother like she'd been handed a verdict and said flat, "He's got cameras, Mom. Jake has cameras." That 3-word sentence changed the soundtrack. Karen froze. In a town like ours, cameras are the great equalizer. They record what you do when you think no one's watching, and suddenly all her little arrangements looked a lot less like community and a lot more like hustle. Guests started whispering. Phones came out. Eyes that had once followed Karen's direction now darted with suspicion. The groom's dad, who'd been glaring at me a minute before as if I'd personally invented mischief, stepped forward and demanded to know if Karen had actually charged them for the venue. The answer, when it came out, made Karen go from queen bee to exposed. Turns out she'd told people this was a premium reserved space and pocketed cash, like she was running her own little event empire out of my barn. The groom's face went from panic to slow anger when he heard he might have to deal with paperwork and fraud. And that's when another twist landed. The groom's father, who'd been quiet and rubbing his temples, said, "I'm a lawyer. I'll handle this." People who've claimed power often forget one thing: power without legitimacy is brittle, and lawyers like paper. But even legal trouble felt academic compared to the immediate, the palpable fall from grace. The guests, angry and embarrassed, started turning on Karen. Phones recorded her frantic explanations. Whispers turned to accusations. And then, as if reality had a sense of theater, the cruiser lights rolled onto the dirt road, and 2 officers stepped out like they were the point in a long, necessary period. The crowd fell quiet. The mighty had nowhere left to stand. When an officer asked what was going on, Karen ran with the narrative of victimhood, all outrage and fingernails, insisting I'd let my dogs loose and ruined everything. I pointed out the obvious. The barn is mine, hers was the trespass. She'd invited people on my property, collected money, misrepresented a venue. She sputtered, tried new angles, but facts are a harsh light. "We got multiple reports of fraud," the officer said, and the air went thin. Handcuffs appeared like punctuation marks at the end of a very long sentence. Seeing her led to the cruiser was almost anticlimactic, not because I wanted to humiliate someone, but because power that's dependent on fear and small-town gaslighting deserves to be deflated in public. There was no cheering, no crowning, mostly a tired, satisfied quiet, like people who'd been waiting for the scales to tilt back to a recognizable balance. Ashley, still messy-faced and cake-streaked, looked at her mother and said soft and final, "Bye, Mom." The kind of line that doesn't ask for any more. Afterwards, the guests trickled away, some mugging awkwardly for the camera, others plotting refunds, a few laughing weakly at the absurdity. The groom, dripping from an ill-timed fountain dip courtesy of Daisy, shrugged and told his new wife, maybe, just maybe, this was for the best. The father lawyer promised restitution. I cleaned up what I could, scratched bare behind the ears, and felt a strange, fizzing satisfaction that had nothing to do with the mess Karen's small kingdom had shrunk. But if you think that's the whole story, there's a quieter part, the part you don't get in viral clips and headlines. Standing in the ruins of a ruined wedding, I felt something else. A lesson that didn't land as a sermon, but as a slow, sharp awareness. Karen's undoing wasn't simply about a woman in a pastel suit getting her comeuppance. It was about the way entitlement hides in small gestures, a favor here, a half-truth there, until someone decides to treat property, people, and promises like their personal ledger. It was about how communities let certain kinds of behavior slide because confrontation is uncomfortable, and how that small complicity lets bullies get bolder. I also realized, maybe belatedly, that I had choices that day. I could have called the cops and filed a complaint before the champagne popped. I could have been the one to lecture and litigate. Instead, I let the dogs deliver immediate, messy justice. Some would call that petty, others poetic. Me. I'll admit, I enjoyed the theater. But I also know that fun doesn't erase the fact that people were hurt, the bride's dress, the time lost, the trust violated. Justice in small towns isn't always neat. Sometimes it's a frosted cake on the ground and a woman in cuffs. Still, the scales tipped back, and that on its own felt like a kind of writing. When the sun dropped low and the last guest's taillights faded down the dirt road, I stood on my porch, looked over the torn bunting and the overturned chairs, and felt a kinship with my land. That's hard to explain, like the dirt under your boots reminding you of truth. "Well, boys," I said to Bear and the gang, and they answered with soft panting, and the kind of contentment only a dog can manifest. The town will talk about this for a long time. Gossip is a slow burn. Karen's reign had ended not with a town hall vote, but with a heap of frosting and a couple of camera angles that didn't lie. So what's the takeaway? Maybe it's this power that isn't accountable eventually collapses under its own weight, and standing up for your rights, even in messy, ridiculous ways, matters. Maybe it's also that vengeance isn't virtue. Consequences are. And maybe the real lesson is smaller and harder to say. Look after your own piece of earth, speak up when something feels wrong, and don't be so polite that you let someone steal your life in small, steady pieces. I'll end with what the whole day left me thinking, a question with no easy answer, the kind you might chew on at night over a beer when someone in a position of small-town power manipulates community trust for personal gain. Do you meet them with the law, with public shaming, or with a little theatrical chaos? And does the method matter if the outcome is justice? Drop your take in the comments. Tell me if I was right, petty, or something worse. And if you've ever had to stand up to a Karen in your life, share the story. I'll read them all, and who knows, maybe next time we'll plan the wedding together, and this time I'll actually RSVP.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.